It is our great pleasure to introduce your chair for Plenary 4, Vivian Maderborn, and our panel of speakers. Please, a warm welcome.
Nō reira, mōrena, kia koutou katoa. Good morning. It's our real pleasure to be here with this beginning of this last day. Our panel this morning is about international development, the role social enterprise can play in this dynamic, rapidly changing international development sector. I'm Vivian Maderborn from UNICEF New Zealand, and it's my real pleasure to be here chairing this panel. We have an incredible group of people, and the kind of feel we want to create this morning is these amazing people having a conversation together that you can witness. And we also want to bring you into that conversation. So after we've each done a very brief 2-minute sound the note of our morning chorus, we're going to structure our dialogue together through your questions. So if you've got inquiries or questions, things you'd like to hear about in terms of international development, social enterprise, please be thinking about those and get them in early. First, I wanted to just set some context about international development because it's changing fast and radically. There are more displaced people, half of them children, more climate disaster, more inequality, and more out-of-control patriarchy than we've ever seen since the Second World War. The thing is, though, that these critical challenges are agnostic to the dualities and polarities that we've used to make sense of the world before. North, south, rich, poor, developing, developed. The issues of our time are truly global. And for the first time, as a world, we've set ourselves global goals to try and organise our response to that level of need. I think these are up behind me or will be very shortly. So I think of the 17 global goals as a mat that we're weaving together. Each of us might be only holding one thread. But as a whole, together we're holding the whole mat. I also think of them as humanity working together. Beyond our individual concerns or our nation's concerns, this is an opportunity for us to hold global good as the human race. You know, Helen Clark, who many of us reference often, says of the UN that if it didn't exist, we'd need to create it. And, you know, quite often we're frustrated by the work of the UN, but there are times when it does sound a note. The end of the Second World War, when it created organisations like UNICEF because it never wanted to see the disaster for children that war is again. And now these global goals, where instead of kind of in a patronising way saying developing countries need to meet these goals, it's saying as a world we need to meet these goals. This is us at our sort of human best, thinking for global good. Actually, countries who've been used to working with the Millennium Goals, which preceded these, developing countries, are way better at thinking about how to organise their country plans and strategies and actions to meet the goals and measure them than countries like New Zealand are. We're still trying to figure out where they fit in our government and civil society structure. So a good frame for the outcomes of all social enterprise that potentially leaps us over the debate about definitions is how does your social enterprise help us, your community and the world achieve one of these goals? No poverty or good health and well-being, And how are you measuring it? And how are you partnering with other people working in that space to amplify your outcomes? Ka koro ki te manu. When I was 10, I went on a camping trip with my 3 sisters, and I woke up in a tent at Lake Rotuiti to the sound of millions of birds welcoming the new day. My dad had taken us on this trip, and he was already out fishing. So, a 10-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 6-year-old, we were on our own in this tent. And we held hands and looked at each other and were transported by the sound of all these voices calling together. Many different notes, but still one song. And that's the power of these gatherings, all our voices sounding differently and together to create a sense of a new day. So we're going to start our panel this morning with just touching base with each of our panel members. We're going to start with Alana, and then we're going to move to Royston, and then to Mairi, and then Clary, and they're each going to sound their note. The note that is their passion for their work and how they connect us with the global goals. Thank you.
Well, standing here in front of you, the crowd I love, and with this rainbow on my back, is a little bit intimidating. And I've not been slept for 4 days. But reflecting about what are really my drivers and the passion and motivation that really led me here, standing here in front of you, and thinking about the long journey that started 12 years ago, I decided just to summarize it with a very short story. Before leaving, my 14-year-old son told me that, and he expressed me his really deep desire, and he told me that once back he wanted me to take him to the dentist to get his teeth whiter. And they say that he wants it because he wanted to have a shining smile. He loves life, he loves people, he loves his friend, and he say, "Mom, I should feel very proud of my smile." And that reminded me another, a lady, a young girl, the same age of my son, 14 years old. I met a few months back in a small town, Naivasha, 1 hour ride from Nairobi. Lucy, her name, works with her mother and helps her mother running a small shop, a kiosk, selling a very limited number of products in a very poor neighborhood in their town. And I was there with my business partner, an amazing social entrepreneur, Anthony, to understand more about her business and to understand about her motivation, because Anthony supplied her a new water vending machine through a franchising agreement. So our idea was really to understand whether she had any compliance about this machine. And Lucy, for all the 2 long hours we were there, was staring at us and smiling, but I couldn't see her smile. She kept all the time her hands in front of their mouth. And I thought that she was embarrassed, that she was shy. But later, Anthony, my business partner, told me that her smile is wounded. Lucy lost all her front teeth because of the high concentration of the fluoride in the water. And this is a problem, it's an entrenched problem in all the Rift Valley. And the empathy, Anthony, the social entrepreneur I work with, the empathy felt for Lucy that the reason why he establishes a social enterprise, and is the empathy I felt that day, and the many other days, meeting many other losers, that is really the reason why I'm here. And I'm sharing with you this feeling of empathy and also the feeling of urgency, because I feel that just feeling empathy and urgency, we can feel better equipped to stand, where are the goals? They are not here any longer, but to stand here and not to feel too much intimidated and face these challenges better. Thank you.
So I'm going to speak sitting here because we have just 2 minutes each and want to make sure that we get the first note in. So the note that I've chosen for this morning is the word soar. It could also be S-O-R-E because I'm struggling with a sore throat. After the cold yesterday, I was sharing with someone that the coldest Mumbai winter is 18 degrees. So you can imagine. but we leave that soar for the moment and talk about really to be able to rise up. And there's that beautiful song, so the good spirits help you to rise up on eagle's wings. And I really want you this morning as you start day 3 to really soar up and look beyond. Look above, rise up above 3 specific areas. 1, the challenges of the day. I know Vivian started with the highest poverty and the great inequalities that exist in our day. And we heard on the first day about the VUCA world that we are in, with the volatility and the uncertainty and the complexity and the ambiguity. But I want you to rise above that and see that every inspirational leader has lived in challenging times, whether it's Mahatma Gandhi, who's the apostle of peace from the land that I come from, or whether it is Muhammad Yunus, who gives us our Grameen philosophy and spirituality. The fact is that they've all existed in times which are extremely challenging, and probably, therefore, tough people survive and bring out the best in tough times. I also want you to rise above the ways we've done things before, and always looking at the silos that we're operating in. I've spent the last 5 days, I'm passionate about development and social enterprises, and I've been disheartened a bit. I've been disheartened because I feel there's too much of pressure being put on social enterprises. They are the ones with the burden of finding the funds, finding the scale, measuring. Everyone's just forcing everything on them, but no one's working on building an ecosystem that's taking the burden off them. And so I want to call that out this morning and be unpopular if I need to be, but I want to call that out and say, let's create the enabling ecosystem to establish. You go to the Bay Area and you see how easy it is for tech startups because the whole system's available to plug and play, the mentoring, the seed funding, people to validate the models, people to help scale. Why are we not doing that here? In India, and we'll talk about that later when I come specifically to work that I'm doing, but through the Grameen model, we didn't set up another microfinance institution. We set up the first social investment bank of the world, probably. And there we've helped to raise capital for microfinance partners, which now reach 52 million clients. That's the scale that's possible if we are able to build and stand on each other's shoulders. So please, do not go back to the drawing board every single time and reinvent the wheel. There are people who've done it, and I hope you can rise above and soar above your own challenges and your own silos and probably your own egos and share and build the shared economy. And the final one I want to talk about is the support and inspiration we get from others. So rise above our narrow boundaries of our geographies, of our countries, and we have enough of challenges already, people putting walls instead of bridges. But the reality is there is enough of support. We need what we call in Grameen to copy left. Whatever you do, leave behind. It's left behind for people to copy. We're not in the copyright space. We're in the space of helping people to grow. So how do we support one another? How do we inspire one another? And the 17 SDGs are a great way to say we're all in it together. These are the global challenges we have. Let's put our shoulder to the wheel. Let the good spirits take us to soar. Thank you.
So we didn't rehearse it, but that's a perfect introduction. So if I was to pick a note, then my note would be compassion. And one of my favourite definitions of that word is a keen awareness of the interconnectedness of all things. And for a long time, I've been very invested in this idea of building a collaborative economy, and what does that really mean? And often the values storyline around the work that all of us do and the idea of collaboration is seen as a sort of nice secondary thing that we do alongside the sort of main business of, our economic systems and the way the world works. And we really need to get to a point where we are bold enough to really think about what do we need to do in order to shift that. What are those tipping points going to be? And I completely agree that that's about how we really innovate around what was described, I think, on the first day as the connective tissue around all of this. So everybody here believes very passionately in the values of social enterprise and social business and social impact. But we need to pay more attention to how we, how we actually build that into the systems that we are all recreating, and be really bold about that. So that the goals give us, I think, a framing to think about what the new world is focusing on. We should be talking in terms of new industries, new supply chains, new institutions. And, it struck me yesterday, how do we, because it's easy for us all to talk about collaboration and how do we get better at it, but what is really practically do we need to do in order to be able to make that happen? And I was just thinking that, really we're all one organisation, and maybe what we need to do is, rather than be thinking about partnering with one another as, a nice thing that we do or, something that we need to do in order to make things work, we just see that as our default. So every single day we are looking at how we are working with one another, because that is the starting point for building a new economy and a new world.
Thank you, Myra.
Kia ora, thanks for having me. And on Royston's point about SOAR, as an Australian coming to New Zealand, I think we all know what SOAR means. I don't think our Wallabies have actually won here for 20 years, so thank you for having us in a much more open forum here. I want to just pick up on some of the themes that have been happening here. And 6 years ago, I was in a village outside Bangalore and baseline testing this little girl called Sabana. And we started this baseline test on mathematics. And it soon became apparent that she wasn't really understanding the questions, and her mother had said that she was only getting 6% in her 4th grade mathematics tests at school. We switched over, because something wasn't quite adding up, to see if this little girl could read. And it turned out that despite 4 years of schooling, she couldn't read, she couldn't write. And the irony there is that we're outside Bangalore, which is the Silicon Valley of India, and this is only 20 minutes outside. Now, it is alarming that if we look at SDG number 4 about quality education around the world, there are 250 million children on this planet, like Sabana, that can't read or write despite 4 years of schooling. Now, what gets me out of bed in the morning is that if you go to that same village, you can buy a bottle of Coke. Yeah. You can buy a sachet of Pantene Pro V. I don't need a lot of that. But you cannot get a good education. You cannot get good healthcare. So I think this grand social enterprise experiment is, how come business can get out there when traditional government services and traditional charities have not been able to? And that's essentially what I think is the big challenge that we're facing in a forum like today. And when you think about the obstacles to what is preventing Sabana from getting that quality education, well, firstly, obviously, as a parent and as a customer, our research shown that she can only pay about $3 per month to try and educate her child. Secondly, there's little to no electricity, little to no internet, and critically, the unavailability of quality teaching available at scale. So as Royston was saying, this is hard. Social enterprise is hard. Trying to create models that can drive education into the most restrictive environments is hard work. So I think all of us gathered for the last 4 days, it's pretty inspiring hearing the stories to see how do we actually figure this out, how do we crack it.
Well, it feels great to be underway, and we're going to just use your questions to structure some dialogue, and so thank you for the questions that are rolling in. I'm loving them. I'm really this one is grabbing attention for me from Dan, and he says global growth goal number 8 is for economic growth. Doesn't this go against other goals such as responsible consumption and caring for our environment? And I wonder what you think about that. And we're all in social enterprise. We all want growth, and yet social enterprise is about that balance. So how do you think that through when you're investing in projects or assessing things? I'd love to hear what your sort of macro and practical thoughts are.
Can I jump in?
Please.
Cool. So it reminds... Can you hear me? So it reminds me of the opposition that Professor Yunus got to winning the Nobel Peace Prize. They said, how can you give him a prize for peace? You can give him a Nobel Prize for economics. And in some ways, when you're lifting 8 million people out of poverty, you're taking them out of the hands of moneylenders, terrorist recruiters, drug lords, flesh trade, all of that. So we are able, if we need, and therefore this point of SOAR, we need to rise above our narrow definition of what is economic poverty or economic development, and say if we are able to empower people, to give them respect at the bottom of the pyramid, then how do we put them into the mainstream economic engine? To my mind, I was joking with the media person who was interviewing me yesterday that I seem to come down the corporate ladder while everybody else moves up. So I started with Citibank and corporate banking, investment banking, then mid-market, then HSBC, SME, then Grameen. So I'm like rock bottom. The next
Your
job
mother would be proud, Royston.
My next job may be in mining or excavation or something, I don't know. But I'm already at the rock bottom. But the reality is, these are all feeding into an economic growth engine. Because the micro enterprise, if the enabling ecosystem exists, and I'm pointing that out time and again, we cannot expect the social entrepreneur to carry all the baggage. We need to create the enabling ecosystem around them to support them. They become an SME, and that becomes a mid-market player, and that becomes an MNC, and that's how the economic growth engine works. So we need to start watering and putting manure to the seed.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. I think we really need to get to a place where we're not pitching things against one another. We need to be working very much with the players in our economic systems to help them think about how they take on board the values that the social enterprise sector represents, because that's the amount of resources that we're then unlocking and changed behaviours. That's where systemic change is going to come from. So we are seeing very interesting shifts in terms of the way we think about economic development and the way we think about international development, and how both of those spaces are beginning to embrace the work of the social enterprise movement. And where we have choices between sort of arguing for our case and working with business and government and education systems to really think about change, then it has to be the latter.
Yeah. Elena.
If you can add, the question really reminded me a very controversial conversation we had during one of our investment committee, and when we decided to make our first investment. And the investment was in a social enterprise in Kenya that is trying to bring consumption, basically, into place where people doesn't have access to goods. And the Vatican sounds very controversial. Are we here really to bring our way of consuming and producing into places that have not been so spoiled? Yeah. And we made the investment because behind that idea, the very deep sense of that investment, of what that social enterprise want to make, was really to tackle the poverty penalty and a kind of patronizing idea we have in our Western countries when we think that we are entitled to decide what poor people
Yeah.
can do by themselves. So I think it's a very controversial this point. So what is really sustainable consumption and sustainable production? But I think we should be very flexible.
Yeah. Right. And, as you're speaking, I'm thinking that I think my response to that question might be it depends on the economic growth. If it's not extractive, if it's, a generative business that's, really contributing to new supply chains that are much more sustainable, then we need that economic growth. And we need a drop in other types of much more exploitative and extractive economic growth. So I guess we're going to get more nuanced about the kind of growth that fits with social enterprise or international development. Hari, did you have a comment you'd like to make?
There's just one thought that I have been developing over the last 3 days, and as I said, I think social enterprise is still an experiment at the moment. I don't think that necessarily the ideal has been achieved, but one comment is this ongoing tension, I guess, between collaboration and competition. Because I think that if we kind of bring the best of both sectors together, competition can still play a very valuable part. If you think about some of the greatest go-forwards in our history, man got to the moon, I guess, because of intense competition. Some of the best services and the best ideas around the world have come from very strong competition. So I think traditionally non-profits have had to compete for funding and collaborated on program, but I don't think we should dismiss the role of competition in the development of social enterprise if it's forcing organisations to be driving costs down for the people that need it the most and providing better services. So I think there has got to be a room for collaboration and competition in this space.
Cool. So I'm racing through all these questions. They're fantastic. I wish we could answer them all. Here's a question, because it builds out of what we've just been saying. How are each of us specifically shifting the narrative around economic growth to one containing much more focus on environmental or social outcomes? Because that's key, isn't it, to the work, whether we're investing or we're running social enterprises, or even if we're in systemic change. How in our worlds do we make those shifts in the predominant economic narrative?
Happy to go first. You want? Go ahead.
There's a slide somewhere, I don't know whether we can bring it up just now, but we did a piece of work to coincide with the launch of the SDGs called a report called Think Global, Trade, Social. And that was really about bringing the whole narrative about social enterprise and business into, how do we leverage those resources to support the development of the SDGs. And so I think part of it is about being prepared to have those kinds of conversations. So certainly in the work that the British Council is doing, part of what we are looking to achieve is where are the conversations that need to happen that are not currently happening that help us to shift that debate. So that's part of the work that we do.
I would like to talk about what we are creating in India. So as I mentioned, we started probably the first world social investment bank. And now my dream is to create a capital with a conscience ecosystem. So in addition to the social investment bank, we've just launched a social debt vehicle. So people like Ratan Tata and others have invested in. We're now looking at a social venture capital fund and then probably a social stock exchange and crowdfunding platform. So we want to really take away the capital raising headache from the social entrepreneur. To my mind, 80 to 90% of the social entrepreneur's time goes in unproductive capital raising. Instead of focusing that time with the client, on the product, on the service, on working with the client, and how do we take that out from that burden off their shoulders and put it where there is a credible person or a credible entity that's doing that for them, who can talk the voice of the capital markets and talk the voice of the bottom of the pyramid at the same time, can speak those two languages and create those bridges for capital to flow. And therefore, embedded in that model is with equal rigor, and I'll talk to that later with a picture of Angelina Jolie, but how do we... No, it's not a tribute to Hugh Hefner. So he has a long-standing legacy, but we'll not talk about. So, thank you. Okay, so So how do we put with equal rigor measurement of social as well as commercial indicators? We cannot have one being sacrificed at the altar of the other. And I'm not saying that we have to be only commercial, but I'm equally saying we cannot be only social. To build scale, we need both to be able to go far and fast with our work. So we need to put those measurement processes in place.
What you are saying, I think that is really a change of narrative. And the idea of really drafting different metrics. But I should share here really what makes me very frustrated when I hear among social enterprises as well, that one of the main indicators, one of the main metrics is job creation. And don't take me wrong, I think that creating jobs is fabulous. Everyone should deserve to have a decent job. But we should really try to higher the bar, and we should try really to change the narrative. We should really try to see the systemic change social enterprises and the other ecosystem players are really able to deliver. So I really think that is a change of the mindset and the culture.
Yeah, great.
I think my colleagues
Great.
nailed it.
How are we going? Is this interesting? Is this kind of useful? Is it hitting the point? Great. Sarah's asked, how do you think the youth of today can help the world or their country reach targets in the SDGs?
So one of the
There aren't enough youth on the stage.
So one of the most exciting things that when I travel with Professor Yunus is visiting universities. We are extremely energized by young people passionate about finding ways to solve global problems. In India, too, we're seeing a raft of social entrepreneurs coming out of colleges wanting to try something new. I think the key comes back to what I mentioned was the capital with a conscience ecosystem, but the key is really the broad ecosystem. There should be an enabling ecosystem where a young person who says, I want goal number 4, I want to go after that, I want to create a business solution, where do I find the right mentor? Click on a button, maybe Akina Foundation, someone else globally, putting that together and saying, this is my mentor for sustainable health. Then I want to get funding, where do I get seed funding? Who are the funds looking at health? Click on that. What are the technology that's available for health? We have a tool over the mobile phone in Uganda that we do, which is an SMS-based program for pregnant women, which tell them, okay, you're on week 3, this is what you should be feeling, this is how you should be acting, this is normal, this is not, this is when you should call your doctor, this is an SMS, these are your iron tablets, this needs to be taken. So how do we make life simple? Why are we trying to be, and so I don't agree with you in some ways about, the competition is good, but in this sector, we have enough of problems. So can we just keep competition aside and just keep it open source and just support and bring everyone into the mix and say, how do we create this world without poverty?
I don't know. I know that I will sound very unpopular. I don't know how many investors will agree with you. Because
So let's talk about impact investing in India, and we'll come to that. There's $5 billion that has come into Indian impact investing. 3 weeks ago, McKinsey released a study, and we did that intentionally because we seem to be living in that silo of saying, we're all warm and fuzzy, there's good things happening, and we'll all preach to the choir. But we need to go out. We're mainstream today. And again, I don't believe we are an experiment. We are mainstream entities. 3 social enterprises in India who are working at the bottom of the pyramid have had IPOs in the last 6 to 12 months. That's the nature of what scale can do for you, and they've not compromised on the segment.
But we are still very few in impact investing, targeting really early stage enterprises. And if we are not able really to be more and building up really a pipeline, maybe microfinance is really very strong on its feet and very robust, but all the other social enterprises, the small ones, and targeting all the other goals, I'm not really sure that we are already mainstream.
But the answer is in the question. The young people are the answer.
The
If
young
we
people-
are
I agree,
creating an
I agree.
enabling ecosystem to get them,
True.
that's how you get pipeline.
No, it's
They're
true.
here on the first row.
No, but young people are beautiful. We organize. No.
So are old people.
All people are beautiful.
Yeah.
We organized last June a boat camp for 400 people, and they really left a really big legacy. They are the one who can really make things change.
So I'm going to bring our dialogue to a bit of a close with a final question, just with a quick comment from you each, and then we'll move into hearing a bit more from each person about their work and their organisation. And the question is, it's beautiful because it's really about, the new day. Assume 50 years from now we've achieved all these goals. Which concepts will you have heard here that have formed the institutions of that time?
Thanks. Could you repeat the question?
Myri, go for it.
It will be about collaboration. We will have figured out how to sort of redefine the concept of institutions so that we're not all working with individual agendas, but we're working on something collective. So that whole concept of connective tissue will have turned into platforms and organisations and just a way of thinking of organising that enables us to do the things we all want to do, but we think are challenging.
Yeah. Go Lumio. Great, thank you, Myri.
I want to add and bring up Mari's first point, compassion. We just cannot leave that out as well. Everything has to be underpinning. The Latin word is compassion, to suffer with, to feel with, to be able to empathize with. And unless we are able to really feel, my energy or passion is not, despite this cold, is not because I'm a great guy. It's because, thank you. But it's because there are 400 million people in India that are below $2 a day threshold. Now we can sit and say, let's take our time, let's measure it, let's do all of that. But if we're not out there, every single day is delaying that poor person who can't read English or who can't really, get a good healthcare solution. So let's get there.
Yeah, I agree. Well, I don't really know what to add because I think it has been really said.
That's beautiful. Harry, anything you?
Look, I think it's been said, yeah.
Collaboration, partnership, empathy.
Compassion.
Compassion. So that sounds pretty amazing. They'll be the institutions 50 years from now. That's pretty... How would we design our institutions with those at the base? It's pretty powerful thought. Great. So we're going to move on to the next phase as we move towards wrapping up. And Alana, would you like to begin just telling us anything you'd like to share about your work in the world right now, perhaps a bit about your organisation, I'm coming from a country, I've been working for all my life overseas, not really in Italy. And my country now is experiencing really rough times, very high youth unemployment rate, poverty. We have almost 6 million people living in poverty, and we have waves of immigrants that creates a really social tension. And we have decided very recently to replicate what we do in other geographies to our countries, because we feel that really immigration, as a friend of mine say, is really the human face of globalization. And this is our way, how we wanted to contribute to the goals, really doing what we have done, but a little bit in a different way. Beautiful. So it's like bringing it home as well as bringing it local and global.
Yeah.
And, really addressing inequality in these issues.
Yeah, we will tackle mainly, we will try to support social enterprises set up by migrants or co-created by migrants and local people. and trying really to relieve the suffering many people are really experience nowadays in Italy, yes.
Yeah, Italy's doing huge work with migrants and, really respect the infrastructure that's being developed in that country to respond. Yeah, thank you. Royston, would you like to?
Great, so I'm going to now take to the stage.
Yep.
So if you can get the slide deck on, and I just want to take you through 2 particular slides, but since I've put 7 down, we'll just walk through them quickly. So that's to show you the numbers. We've talked about it before, but $5 billion of impact investing in India, very clearly defined, segment defined, the income threshold of the family benefiting defined, the growth in number of social enterprises, 700 of them have been added on. So to the point of pipeline, how do we create an enabling ecosystem? To the point of growth and scale, this is not an experiment. 3 entities have gone in for an IPO in the recent months. The fact that we can demonstrate that type of traction has to make us think and believe in ourselves much more. We need not aspire for an IPO, but the key is we can become big. And even if our one village or one state is taken care of, can we collaborate with others to be able to build that scale out? I want to talk about a failure story, not a success story in microfinance, which was pretty much the case of the swan turning into an ugly duckling, when there was a big crisis in the sector in Indian microfinance, and overnight microfinance was shut down by the regulator. And the challenge at that time was everyone was blaming each other. The rates are too high. No one's looking at the poor client. This is what's happening. Is it back to money lending days? And in that crisis, people suffered. There was tremendous pain. But when we came down to what was the crux of the problem, I reflected on this picture. So I know you have to be very politically correct in New Zealand. I've been warned, I've been told, I've been coached. But no, it's not her. But I think, so I talk for myself, but when I saw this picture, the first reaction is you want to appreciate the beauty of the legs. And then, but then you come back to the fact is there is only one leg that you can see. So, you're making an assumption that there are beautiful legs, but you can see only one. And I'm getting to a point here. The reality is that there are 2 legs that any social enterprise stands on, the social leg and the commercial leg. Do not fool yourself for a moment that if you think that one leg is doing really well, that the other one is. You need to measure with equal rigor. You need to measure with equal rigor. It's a serious point. You need to measure with equal rigor the social leg and the commercial leg. You cannot believe that because I'm scaling up, because I'm 8 million clients, because I'm doing an IPO, because the sector is now 52 million clients, that everything's going well. You can be hit by a problem if you are not measuring with equal rigor the social measurement impact. The impact of the work that you're doing. Grameen has a tool called Progress Out of Poverty Index, which we measure on all our clients. At the same time, if you're obsessed only with the social measurements and are not looking at how do we build scale, how do we take it to the next level, how do we keep it sustainable, how do we keep it commercially viable, then you will remain a hobby. And small is a hobby, but scale is when you're able to tackle global problems and meet sustainable development goals. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. It was beautiful. I think, Myri.
I'm not really sure how to follow the Angelina Jolie metaphor. Do we have the slide with the circles? Can we pop that up? So the British Council's been working in the social enterprise sphere for around about 10 years now, and we do a range of different things. We operate in around about 30 countries, mobilising social enterprise programmes. I wanted just to bring this slide up, which was part of the report I mentioned earlier, the Think Global Trade Social work that we did. And the point there, which I think reflects some of the conversations we've been having, is that we need to be bold about the discussion we're having and how we really access the resources at that end of the slide. We do get very caught up in talking about impact investing and aid, etc. And that they're all parts of the conversation we need to have, but we should be bold enough to be talking to all of that resource. And, you know, so to the argument we were having earlier around competition and collaboration, from my perspective, it's very much a case of competition has been the primary model. We built that, we've made it that way, and we assume that it's primary, and it's time for collaboration to be the primary model. That's not to say that competition doesn't play a role, but it's the primary, secondary piece that's key. So in terms of what the British Council is doing, some of it is about trying to change the debate and, you know, to really engage people in thinking differently about what's possible. We work with governments, we work at the institutional level, we work with individuals. So a number of people were at an event we had last night with our active citizens. And I think that, you know, it's an incredibly privileged role to have, because we're able to really see how all of this works and needs to work at so many different levels. So it is about ecosystems, and it's fundamentally about people, and it's about how institutions change their behaviours. So a lot of the work that we're doing involves capacity building programs of different types. We do a lot of work mobilising governments and working with governments, largely based on the work that's taking place in the UK and how we can really sort of share and exchange how you build a strong, successful social enterprise ecosystem. So this week we've been very privileged to have government ministers and senior policy advisors from 17 countries around Asia, who were all with us in a policy dialogue event yesterday, where we launched a declaration of intent, essentially, for all of those countries to work together on supporting social enterprise and social investment. And that's been endorsed and supported by a number of other organisations, the Social Enterprise World Forum, the Global Steering Group on Social Investment, and ABPN and Akina and others. And the point there again is, how do we, you know, really convene those conversations and then turn that into traction, so that we're all working together and feeling like we're all part of something. It's incredibly powerful when you have people in a room genuinely looking at how they can go back to their countries and, you know, shift this whole agenda forward, and being incredibly appreciative of the opportunity to exchange with one another. So that's some of the work the British Council is involved in at the moment, and you know, we're incredibly privileged to work with so many different partners in countries around the world, and really see that collaboration in action every day.
It's an amazing program. Thank you. All yours, Clary.
I might jump up as well.
Yeah,
Can
great.
I grab that? Thank you. So I guess for us, we've been working in these villages in India and now Cambodia for the last decade. And I just want to share just a couple of the lessons that we've learnt about certainly how my mind frame has shifted as an Australian working in the developing world. The first is, when it comes to this notion of social enterprise, transforming the person that you work with into a customer rather than a beneficiary. So everyone in this room, I'm sure, has heard that maxim: if you give the man a fish, he'll eat for a night. If you teach the man to fish, then he'll eat for life. I think what social enterprise does, though, is starts to push that analogy even further. Can we actually sell the man a fishing rod? Can we give the man a microfinance loan so he can set up a fishing business? And in line with the goals, why should it just be the fisherman anyway? Why can't it be the fisherwomen as well? So the question is, can social enterprise push us into this place, and what does that mean for the inclusive capitalism that's going to dictate the next 100 years? For us, it was totally transformative. I started 40K when I was a uni student, and very ideal. We thought it would cost $40,000 to build a school. And we did, it opened, but I remember going through this massive low. And it's because, as Royston said, there's 400 million people in India that could do with better education. It's 275,000 villages. So when we made this seminal trip to a village in 2012 and asked a question that wasn't even on our vocab for the first 6 years of the organisation's life: will this person pay for education? It's a question that just doesn't happen enough. The answer was yes. And then the role of the social enterprise is then, well, if this person can pay just $3 a month for education, how can we use that price point to dictate the innovation that has to follow so that we don't just do what we can for $3 a month, but rather you set quality as the indicator that doesn't move? How do you create quality education for $3 per child per month? And that leads to the second key insight that we've kind of gathered, that you can do things cheap. There's no doubt about that. And cheap has that resonance with ideas of tacky. But Royston also talked about Ratan Tata, and we've been totally inspired by the way that he approaches the challenges in a place like India, because he kind of comes at it from the perspective of, don't make it cheap, make it cost effective. And they're totally different things. So for us, the only way that we could then spend 5 years trying to drive down the cost of an essential service like education is to essentially be totally frugal, to not just adjust around the edges, but to reinvent, like you see all the time in places like India and Cambodia and others. So from a position of content, we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. There's great educational content from the likes of British Council all around the world. Just that for a child like Sabana, it's not available offline, it's not mapped to local languages. So organisations like us can do the mapping, translate, so that children in villages can have the service. Technology, we are now in a golden age. We are in a total golden age. 15 years ago, it was just desktop computers. In a village, they're not particularly useful. They're subject to the electricity fluctuations and they can gather dust. They're hard to use. Tablet technologies, Raspberry Pis, drones now, these emerging technologies are giving us opportunities like never before. And the role of teachers. That in these developing environments, you can have people in villages that are hugely passionate about education, but not formally equipped with the tools to teach. I think that you can learn from models through the way that healthcare has been done in some remote parts of the world to see that technology subsidised with amplifying the resources of what's out there in these communities can essentially bridge the gap. So to me, they're the two things. Social enterprise inquires about, can we turn the people that we work with into customers and not beneficiaries, and what conversations that lead to? And secondly, how do we totally hack together different kinds of existing technologies and principles so that you can deliver high quality at very low price? Because it's people like Sabana and her family that need this stuff more than most people in the world, and our challenge as social entrepreneurs is to do it in the best way that we can, quality at ultra low price. Thanks.
So, I guess what we wanted to convey this morning is that there's work at government level, there's work at corporate level, there's work at small social enterprise and individual level, and they make together the whole, which fit into the global goals, which we can all use as a map. You know, I want to thank each of you so much for coming and sharing your stories and, you know, bringing yourself to the stage as well as your work. And one of the things we do really well in Aotearoa is we give wings to words through song. And I wondered if we could thank this group of people and honour their work with Te Araha. And you are all going to be way better singers than me, so I'm expecting you to lead this from the floor. So let's do that. Where are the singers in the room? Te aroha, te whakapono, me te rangi mari e tato tato e. And we have here this beautiful little gift, which is New Zealand panamu from this tribe here. So look, I just want to thank you.